If you've ever been underestimated for your thoughtful nature or punished for refusing to play office politics, hit that like button and subscribe. What you're about to hear is a testament to the power of inner stillness as the ultimate form of revenge. This isn't just a story, it's a blueprint for turning your perceived weaknesses into your greatest strengths. It began on a Monday morning, just like any other Monday morning at Sterling Technologies. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes before most of my colleagues, to spend time in meditation in the empty conference room. This had been my routine for the entire 5 years I'd worked at the company. I'd discovered early in my career that starting my day with 20 minutes of stillness and mental preparation gave me an edge that coffee never could. While others rushed in frantically already behind before their first meeting, I entered each day centered, focused, and ready to direct my energy rather than be consumed by chaos. On this particular Monday, however, my routine was interrupted by the sound of the conference room door swinging open. There stood Richard Sterling, the CEO, and my direct supervisor, along with 2 board members I didn't recognize. Richard was a man who embodied the frantic energy I'd always sought to avoid. He moved through life as if he were constantly putting out fires. His face perpetually flushed, his voice always raised a few decibels above necessary. He was, by all conventional measures, successful as self-made millionaire who'd built Sterling Technologies from nothing. But I'd always sensed a hollowness beneath his bluster, a restlessness that no amount of money or accomplishment could soothe. "Still doing your weird voodoo stuff, Michael?" Richard sneered, gesturing toward my meditation cushion. The board members chuckled uncomfortably. "We have investors coming in an hour, and you're sitting in a dark room humming to yourself." I stood slowly, maintaining my composure despite the interruption. "Good morning, Richard. I was just finishing my morning preparation for the day. I'll be ready for the investors." Richard shook his head, turning to the board members. "This is what I'm dealing with. My top performer, but completely disconnected from the reality of business. No passion, no fire, just ... calm." He said the word calm as if it were a disease. The shorter of the 2 board members, a man with silver hair and an expensive suit, stepped forward. "Actually, Richard, Michael's presentation last quarter secured the Henderson account. That's $12 million in annual revenue. I'd say his methods are working." Richard's face tightened. "The numbers are good, I'll grant that. But leadership requires more than numbers. It requires energy, drive, the ability to inspire people through passion." He turned back to me. "Anyway, get ready. We need you at your best today." As they left, I took a deep breath, centering myself as I'd been taught to do when faced with disruption. This wasn't the first time Richard had criticized my approach to work, and I suspected it wouldn't be the last. What he didn't understand, and what I was beginning to realize was my greatest advantage, is that my calmness wasn't an absence of passion, but a channeling of it. Where Richard scattered his energy in 100 different directions, reacting to every stimulus with equal intensity, I conserved mine, directing it with precision toward what truly mattered. The investor meeting went well, as expected. While Richard and other executives spoke in grandiose terms about vision and market disruption, I presented concrete data, realistic projections, and actionable strategies. The investors seemed to appreciate the contrast, nodding along as I spoke and asking thoughtful questions. Richard, as usual, took credit for the successful outcome in his follow-up email to the company, barely mentioning my contribution. This pattern had defined my relationship with Richard since I'd joined Sterling Technologies straight out of college. I would do the work research, analysis, strategy development, and Richard would take the credit. In the beginning, it had bothered me. I'd felt the sting of injustice each time my ideas were presented as his, each time my hard work went unrecognized. But over the years, I'd learned to detach from the need for external validation. I found my satisfaction not in praise from others, but in the quiet knowledge of my own competence and in the results I was able to produce. What I didn't realize then was that Richard's resentment of my approach was growing. Where he once merely found my calmness peculiar, he now began to see it as a threat. My steady rise through the ranks, based purely on performance metrics rather than political maneuvering, challenged his belief that success required the kind of aggressive, performative passion he embodied. The turning point came 6 months after that Monday morning interruption. We were working on a merger with a smaller tech company that had developed some innovative AI technology. I had been leading the due diligence process and had discovered something concerning the smaller company had significantly overstated their capabilities, and their technology was years away from being commercially viable. I prepared a detailed report outlining my findings and recommended that we walk away from the deal. Richard called me into his office to discuss my report. "I don't understand, Michael," he said, pacing behind his desk. "This deal could put us on the map. The press alone would be huge." "The technology doesn't work as advertised," I explained calmly. "We'd be acquiring a company based on false promises. It would drain our resources and damage our reputation in the long run." Richard stopped pacing and stared at me. "You always do this. You always find reasons not to act. You're too cautious, too analytical. Business is about taking risks, about having the courage to move forward despite uncertainty." "It's not courage if it's reckless," I replied. "It's foolishness." The color rose in Richard's face. "You think you're better than the rest of us, don't you? With your meditation and your calm demeanor, you think you're above the messy work of business, above the passion and drive it takes to succeed." "I think clarity is more valuable than chaos," I said evenly. "I think decisions should be based on facts, not feelings." Richard slammed his hand on his desk. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. No passion, no fire. You're a machine, Michael. A calculating, passionless machine. And I'm done with it." I stood in silence for a moment, processing what was happening. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're fired," Richard said, his voice cold. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. We'll mail your personal items." I felt a surge of emotion, anger, disbelief, betrayal, but I didn't let it show. Years of practicing emotional control had taught me that reacting in the heat of the moment rarely leads to good outcomes. Instead, I simply nodded, gathered my composure, and said, "I understand." As I walked out of Richard's office, past my bewildered colleagues, escorted by security, I didn't feel defeated. I felt liberated. For years, I had poured my energy into building Richard's company, to making him look good while receiving little recognition. Now, that energy was mine to direct as I saw fit. That evening, as I sat in meditation in my small apartment, I reflected on what had happened. I had lost my job, yes, but I had gained something far more valuable: freedom. Freedom to build something of my own, something that reflected my values and my approach to business. I thought about the principles that had guided me through my career stillness: emotional control, simplicity of purpose, disciplined action, and realized that these weren't just personal practices. They were business strategies. Strategies that, if applied correctly, could lead to extraordinary success. The next morning, instead of searching for another job, I began planning my own company. I spent the first week in deep contemplation, defining my purpose and values. I knew that I wanted to build a company based on the principles that had served me well: clarity over chaos, substance over style, long-term value over short-term gains. I named the company Clarity Solutions and set out to develop a business plan. The first 6 months were challenging. Without the resources of a large corporation behind me, I had to be creative. I used my savings to fund the initial development of a software platform that would help businesses make data-driven decisions. I worked from my apartment, often putting in 12-hour days. But unlike at Sterling Technologies, these hours felt purposeful. I was building something of my own, something that reflected my vision. During this time, I maintained my daily practice of meditation and reflection. Each morning, I would spend time in stillness, clarifying my goals for the day. Each evening, I would review my progress, not with criticism, but with curiosity. What had worked? What hadn't? How could I improve? This practice of regular reflection allowed me to course-correct quickly and avoid wasting energy on unproductive strategies. I also focused on emotional control. There were moments of frustration, technical challenges, funding rejections, potential clients who chose to work with more established companies. In these moments, I would pause, breathe, and remember that emotion, if uncontrolled, wastes energy. I learned to acknowledge my feelings without letting them dictate my actions. If I felt angry about a rejection, I would channel that energy into improving my pitch. If I felt anxious about funding, I would focus on demonstrating the value of my product more effectively. After 6 months of development, I launched Clarity Solutions with a small but impressive client base. The platform was a success, and through word of mouth, our client base began to grow. I hired my first employees, choosing them not just for their skills, but for their ability to remain calm under pressure and their commitment to thoughtful decision-making. We created a company culture that valued reflection over reaction, strategy over speed. 2 years after being fired by Richard, Clarity Solutions was thriving. We had secured significant funding, expanded our client base, and developed a reputation for delivering exceptional results. I had maintained my practice of daily meditation and reflection, and I encouraged my employees to do the same. We had a meditation room in our office, and we started each team meeting with a minute of silence to center ourselves. It was during this period of growth that I first heard rumors about Sterling Technologies. The merger with the AI company had gone through despite my warnings, and as I had predicted, it had been a disaster. The technology didn't work as promised. The integration was chaotic, and the company had lost millions. Richard, it seemed, was struggling. I felt a flicker of satisfaction when I heard the news, but I didn't dwell on it. My focus was on building my own company, not on watching Richard's fail. I had learned long ago that comparison and resentment are wastes of energy. Energy that could be better directed toward productive action. 3 years after founding Clarity Solutions, we received an acquisition offer from a larger tech company. The offer was generous, but after careful consideration, I decided to decline. I wasn't ready to give up control of what I had built. Instead, I proposed a strategic partnership that would allow us to maintain our independence while benefiting from the larger company's resources. It was through this partnership that I found myself sitting across from Richard Sterling in a boardroom 3.5 years after he had fired me. The larger company we had partnered with had also partnered with Sterling Technologies, and our two companies were now working together on a major project. Richard looked older, more tired than when I had last seen him. The confident bluster was gone, replaced by a weary defensiveness. As we discussed the project, it became clear that Richard was no longer in control. His company was struggling. He was desperate for this partnership to succeed. During a break in the meeting, Richard approached me. "Michael, I didn't know you'd be leading this project," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Richard," I replied calmly. "It's good to see you." He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know things ended badly between us. I was impulsive when I fired you. I was under a lot of pressure." I nodded, saying nothing, allowing the silence to hang between us. "Clarity Solutions is impressive," he continued. "You've built something remarkable." "Thank you," I said simply. He hesitated, then looked me directly in the eyes. "I was wrong about you, Michael. About your approach? I see now that your calmness wasn't weakness. It was ... strength." I felt a surge of emotion, not triumph, but a quiet satisfaction. This was the moment I had subconsciously been working toward for years. Not the satisfaction of revenge, but the validation of my approach, the recognition that my way of working had value. "I appreciate you saying that, Richard," I said. "Water under the bridge." As I walked away, I realized that this was my revenge. Not that Richard had admitted he was wrong, but that I had remained true to myself and my principles, and in doing so, had built something successful and meaningful. The revenge wasn't against Richard, but against the idea that success requires aggression, that passion must be loud, that calmness is weakness. In the months that followed, I watched as Sterling Technologies continued to struggle. The partnership eventually dissolved, and a year later, I heard that Richard had been forced out as CEO by that time. Clarity Solutions had grown to twice its previous size, and I had begun mentoring other entrepreneurs who wanted to build businesses based on principles of mindfulness and emotional intelligence. Sometimes, when I reflect on that journey, I'm struck by how perfectly it illustrates the power of the principles I've lived by. The law of inner stillness taught me to pause before reacting, to think before acting. The science of emotional command helped me channel my feelings into productive action rather than allowing them to consume me. The power of simplicity and definite purpose allowed me to focus my energy on what truly mattered. Rather than being distracted by trivialities, the rhythm of discipline and faith gave me the structure to persevere through challenges. And the legacy of peace and wisdom has enabled me to share what I've learned with others. Richard's downfall wasn't caused by my actions, but by his own inability to control his emotions, his tendency to react rather than respond, his focus on appearance over substance. In firing me, he thought he was eliminating a threat to his leadership style. In reality, he was cutting himself off from the very qualities that could have saved his company. As for me, I continue to start each day with meditation, to approach each challenge with calm deliberation, to value substance over style. I've learned that success doesn't require the kind of aggressive, performative passion that Richard embodied. Success requires clarity, focus, emotional control, and the discipline to act consistently in alignment with one's values. This is the real revenge, not proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. Not tearing others down, but building yourself up. Not reacting to injustice with anger, but responding with purpose. The sweetest revenge is living well, not because others are watching, but because it reflects who you are and what you value. The final chapter of this story occurred 2 years after that meeting with Richard. Clarity Solutions had grown exponentially, and we were now considered one of the most innovative tech companies in the industry. I was invited to speak at a major business conference, and as I looked at the program, I saw that Richard Sterling was also scheduled to speak on a panel about leadership in times of crisis. I arrived at the conference early, as was my habit, and spent some time in quiet preparation in the green room. When Richard entered, he seemed surprised to see me. "Michael," he said, nodding curtly. "I didn't realize you were speaking here." "Good morning, Richard," I replied calmly. "Yes, I'm speaking later today on sustainable business practices." He looked away uncomfortable. "I saw your company's latest numbers. Impressive." "Thank you. We've been fortunate." Richard hesitated, then took a seat across from me. "Can I ask you something, Michael?" "Off the record." I nodded, curious. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you stay so calm, so centered with all the pressure?" "I've tried everything: executive coaches, retreats, even meditation apps. Nothing sticks." I considered his question carefully. "It's not something you do, Richard. It's something you are. It's a practice, not a solution. It's about building the habit of stillness, of emotional control, of deliberate action. It doesn't happen overnight." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've made so many mistakes, reacting instead of responding. The merger with that AI company? I knew you were right, but my ego couldn't admit it. I fired you because your calmness made me feel inadequate." I listened without judgment, recognizing the vulnerability in his admission. "After I left Sterling," I said softly, "I realized something important. Your calmness isn't an absence of passion. It's the channeling of passion. Your emotions aren't enemies to be defeated. They're energy to be directed. Your stillness isn't weakness. It's power." Richard looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I wish I'd understood that sooner." "We understand what we're ready to understand," I replied. "It's never too late to begin." Later that day, as I stood at the podium delivering my speech on sustainable business practices, I looked out at the audience and saw Richard sitting in the front row, listening intently. I spoke about the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership. It's about the value of stillness in decision-making, about the power of simplicity in complex situations. I didn't mention Richard or Sterling Technologies, but as I spoke, I felt a sense of closure, of completion. After my speech, Richard approached me again. "That was transformative," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you. I'm glad it resonated," I replied. "Retiring next month," he continued. "The board has accepted my resignation. I'm going to take some time to realign, to learn what you've been teaching today." I nodded, extending my hand. I wish you the best on your journey, Richard. As we shook hands, I felt not triumph, but a quiet satisfaction. This was the culmination of my revenge, not Richard's downfall, but his transformation. Not his defeat, but his growth. The sweetest revenge is not seeing your enemies fail, but seeing them learn, grow, and perhaps even find the peace you've discovered. Reflective wrap-up. As I look back on this journey, I'm struck by the irony of it all. Richard fired me for what he perceived as a lack of passion, for what he saw as weakness. Yet those very qualities, my calmness, my emotional control, my thoughtful approach, were what enabled me to build a successful company and what ultimately led Richard to seek my guidance. I've learned that revenge doesn't have to be about destruction or defeat. The most satisfying revenge is about transformation, both your own and, ideally, your adversaries'. It's about demonstrating through your actions the value of your approach, showing that there's another way to succeed, another way to lead. The principles that guided me, stillness, emotional control, simplicity, discipline, are not just business strategies. They're life strategies. They apply not just to building companies, but to building lives of purpose and meaning. Richard's story didn't end with his retirement. I've heard that he's started teaching leadership courses at a local college, incorporating many of the principles he once dismissed. He's found a new sense of purpose, not in building companies, but in building leaders. As for me, I continue to lead Clarity Solutions, not with aggression or a performative passion, but with quiet confidence and steady purpose. I continue to start each day with meditation, to approach each challenge with calm deliberation, to value substance over style. The revenge I sought wasn't against Richard, but against the idea that success requires sacrificing your values, that leadership requires aggression, that strength must be loud. The sweetest revenge has been proving, through my actions and my success, that there's another way, a way of stillness, of emotional control, of deliberate action. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated for your calm approach, or if you're looking for ways to incorporate mindfulness into your professional life, hit that like button and subscribe. In the comments below, share how you've used stillness or emotional control as a strength in your own life. And as always, thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all, but quiet, deliberate action.